Good evening once again, background historian crew. If you're into religion and philosophies of the world, you'll enjoy this episode. We are taking a dive into Mormonism, the religion founded by Joseph Smith, and its controversial history with polygamy. Sit back, relax, and enjoy our dive into one of the most interesting sects of Christianity. Let's begin. Part 1: Beginnings in Early America. Introduction: the fertile ground for a new religion. The early 19th century in America was a time of great religious energy and experimentation. Known as the Second Great Awakening, this period saw revival sweep across towns, inspiring both fervent conversions and new religious movements. It was in this charged environment that Mormonism, officially the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, took root. The story begins not with temples or pioneers, but with the young farm boy Joseph Smith and a nation still defining its spiritual identity. The burned-over district of New York. Geography. Western New York, where Joseph Smith was raised, was called the burned-over district because so many revival fires had swept through that every soul seemed scorched by religious zeal. Religious diversity: Methodists, Baptists, Presbyterians, Universalists, and seekers of all kinds competed for followers. Camp meetings could draw thousands, filled with passionate preaching and dramatic conversions. Restlessness: many Americans felt unsatisfied with established churches, hungry for new revelations, and curious about the idea that God might still speak to humankind. This was the world young Joseph Smith inherited, a place alive with questions and religious experimentation. Joseph Smith's early life. Birth: Joseph Smith Jr. was born in 1805 in Vermont, one of 11 children in a poor farming family. Struggles: the Smith family faced frequent hardship, moving several times before settling in Palmyra, New York. Spiritual curiosity: young Joseph grew up surrounded by debates over faith. His own family was religiously divided, with members drawn to different denominations. Quest for truth: confused by the conflicting claims of preachers, Joseph began searching for answers beyond human voices. The spiritual restlessness of the nation mirrored Joseph's own inner turmoil. The religious question of the age. Which church was true? Many Americans were asking this question: was it the Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, or something new entirely? Scriptural curiosity: the Bible was read intensely, but interpretations varied widely. Democratic spirit: in a nation newly independent, religion, too, became democratized. Anyone might claim the right to preach or to start a church. This spirit of experimentation allowed space for a radical new movement to emerge. Joseph Smith's first vision, 1820. The experience: according to Joseph, at age 14 he went into the woods to pray and ask God which church was true. The vision: he reported seeing two personages, identified as God the Father and Jesus Christ, who told him that all existing churches were corrupt, and that he should join none of them. Significance: this vision, later called the First Vision, became the founding event of Mormon theology. It suggested not only that God was still revealing truth, but that Joseph himself was chosen as a prophet. Though little known at the time, this vision would later be recognized as the spark that ignited a new faith. Early skepticism and belief. Mockery: Joseph's story was dismissed by many as fantasy or deception. Family support: his immediate family largely believed him, especially his mother, Lucy Mack Smith. Persecution begins: from the very start, Joseph's claims drew opposition. Neighbors accused him of blasphemy and dishonesty. The pattern was set: Mormonism would attract both passionate converts and fierce enemies. Seeds of New Scripture. The Golden Plates, 1823. Joseph later recounted that an angel named Moroni visited him, directing him to buried golden plates inscribed with an ancient record. A prophetic role: this story positioned Joseph not merely as a seeker of truth but as a new prophet, called to bring forth Scripture for a modern age. Expectation builds: though he would not translate the plates until later, these early years established his reputation as someone who claimed direct contact with the divine. The concept of new scripture set Mormonism apart from nearly all other American religions. Broader religious experiments of the era. Shakers, practicing celibacy and communal living, they reflected America's hunger for new ways of life. Camp meetings, highly emotional, revivalist gatherings showed the appetite for spiritual experience beyond traditional sermons. Millennial expectation, many believed the second coming of Christ was imminent, fueling the search for divine guidance. Mormonism would absorb these currents. Communal ideals, millennialism, and radical claims of revelation. Closing reflection. The beginnings of Mormonism were rooted in the soil of early America, a restless land of revivals, debates, and new visions of faith. Joseph Smith, a poor farm boy in upstate New York, stepped into this world with a story unlike any other, that God had spoken directly to him, that the churches of his day were corrupt, and that a new dispensation of truth was about to unfold. As you drift into sleep, imagine the quiet woods of New York in 1820, where a young boy knelt in prayer and, according to his account, saw the heavens open. From that moment of light began a movement that would face persecution, flourish in the desert, and spread across the globe. Part 2, The First Visions. Introduction, Revelations in the Burned-Over District. In the early 1820s, Joseph Smith's experiences in the wooded countryside of New York moved from youthful searching to bold declarations of divine encounter. These episodes, visions of heavenly beings, conversations with angels, and revelations of hidden records, would become the foundation of Mormonism. Where others saw superstition or fraud, Joseph's followers saw the dawning of a new dispensation. The First Vision, 1820. The setting, at just 14, Joseph, troubled by religious confusion, entered a grove of trees near his family home in Palmyra. His prayer, he later said he prayed to know which church to join, distressed by denominational disputes. The Theophany, Joseph recounted that God the Father and Jesus Christ appeared to him, telling him none of the churches were true and that he was to join none of them. Reactions, when he shared this account, local ministers mocked and rejected him. The First Vision became the foundational story of Mormonism, framing Joseph not as a seeker but as a prophet chosen by God. Angelic Visitations, 1823. The Angel Moroni. On September 21, 1823, Joseph reported that an angel named Moroni appeared to him, telling him of golden plates buried in a hill near his home. The plates, the angel explained that the plates contained the record of ancient peoples and prophets on the American continent, written in a language called Reformed Egyptian. Sacred task, Joseph was told he was chosen to translate the record into English and that it contained the fullness of the gospel. The idea that America itself held ancient scripture was both startling and inspiring in a young, expanding nation. The Hill Cumorah. Location, near Palmyra stood a drumlin hill that Joseph identified as the resting place of the plates. Visits over 4 years, each year for 4 years, Joseph claimed he was visited by Moroni at the site, receiving instruction but not yet permitted to take the plates. Tests of worthiness, these yearly encounters tested his patience, discipline, and devotion, shaping him as a prophet. The Hill Cumorah became a sacred landmark for early Mormons, a place where heaven touched earth. Family and community reactions. The Smiths' belief, Joseph's family largely supported his visions, especially his mother, Lucy Mack Smith. Skepticism from neighbors, many in the area accused Joseph of fabrication, ridiculing him for gold-digging stories that resembled folk tales. Gathering supporters, despite ridicule, Joseph began attracting early followers intrigued by the promise of new scripture. From the beginning, the visions divided communities. Believers saw divine revelation, while skeptics saw deception. The broader religious climate. Second Great Awakening, revival preachers filled America with stories of visions, prophecies, and personal encounters with God. Mormon uniqueness, yet Joseph's claims differed. His visions didn't just offer personal comfort, they announced a new restoration of God's authority. Tension. This direct claim to divine authority set Joseph apart, sparking conflict with established churches. The first visions were not isolated mystical experiences, They were bold declarations that redefined religious authority in America. Theological significance. Restorationism. The visions introduced the idea that Christianity had fallen into apostasy and needed full restoration. God and Christ as separate beings. Joseph's vision described two distinct personages, shaping Mormon theology's departure from traditional Christian Trinitarianism. Prophetic authority. By claiming direct revelation, Joseph placed himself in the line of biblical prophets. These elements made Mormonism a uniquely American yet radically new religious faith. Closing reflection. Joseph Smith's early visions, of God and Christ, of angelic messengers, and of hidden records, were audacious claims in a restless religious age. They marked the transition from a young seeker to a prophet declaring divine authority. The first visions became the foundation of a faith that would grow from ridicule and persecution to a global religion. As you settle into rest, picture the boy in the grove, kneeling in prayer, surrounded by quiet trees, as light descends and his world changes forever. From such a vision, Mormonism began its journey into history. Part 3, the Book of Mormon and its translation. Introduction, a new scripture for a new age. No event more clearly distinguished Joseph Smith and the movement he founded than the claim of a new sacred text. In a world where the Bible reigned supreme, the idea of additional scripture, written on golden plates, buried in a hill, and revealed by divine power, was shocking. Yet this audacious claim became the foundation of Mormon identity. The Book of Mormon, published in 1830, stood as both a testimony of faith and a lightning rod of controversy. The discovery of the golden plates. Angel Moroni's visits. In 1823, Joseph Smith reported that an angel named Moroni directed him to golden plates buried in a hillside called Cumorah near Palmyra, New York. The plates were said to be inscribed with Reformed Egyptian characters, telling the story of ancient peoples of the Americas and their encounters with Jesus Christ after his resurrection. Waiting period. For 4 years, Joseph said he visited the site annually, instructed by Moroni, until finally in 1827 he received the plates. To believers, these plates symbolized a sacred trust. To skeptics, they became proof of fraud. The translation process. Seer stones and Urim and Thummim. Joseph described using special instruments to translate, interpreters he called the Urim and Thummim, as well as a seer stone placed in a hat, through which he read divine words. Dictation. Joseph dictated the text to scribes, most notably Oliver Cowdery. Witnesses recalled him working without notes, producing long passages in a single sitting. Miracle or mystery. Followers saw it as evidence of inspiration, while critics viewed it as deception or improvisation. The process itself became part of the mythology of Mormon origins, where the miraculous intersected with the ordinary. The structure of the Book of Mormon. Ancient prophets. The book recounts the journeys and teachings of prophets such as Nephi, Alma, Mosiah, and Mormon, after whom the book is named. 2 civilizations. It tells of the Nephite and Lamanite, descendants of families who left Jerusalem around 600 BCE. Central event. The risen Christ appears in the New World, teaching and ministering to the people. Finale. The Nephite are destroyed, leaving the Lamanite as the ancestors of indigenous peoples. This sweeping narrative combined biblical style with distinctly American themes of migration, promised lands, and divine destiny. Witnesses to the plates. 3 witnesses. Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris all claimed they saw the plates and were shown them by an angel. 8 witnesses. Another group testified they physically handled the plates, though only through faith could one see beyond the sealed portion. Significance. These testimonies, printed in every edition of the Book of Mormon, were meant to bolster Joseph's credibility. Even as some witnesses later left the church, they did not deny their testimony of the plates. Publication in 1830. Financing. Martin Harris mortgaged his farm to pay for printing the first edition, an act of devotion that nearly ruined him financially. The printer, E.B. Grandin in Palmyra, produced 5,000 copies, an enormous print run for the time. Reaction. The book drew ridicule from many, called a clumsy imitation of the Bible. Yet to converts, it was a New Testament of Christ's work in the Americas. The printing of the Book of Mormon marked the formal birth of Mormonism. Themes and theology of the book. Restoration, it claimed to restore lost truths and correct errors in existing Christianity. Covenant people, it framed America itself as a promised land with a divine destiny. Universalism, it emphasized that Christ's gospel extended to all nations and peoples, not just the old world. Prophecy, it foretold the rise of a new dispensation in the latter days. These themes resonated deeply with Americans searching for meaning in a rapidly changing nation. Criticism and controversy. Plagiarism accusations. Critics claimed Joseph borrowed from the Bible or from contemporary books like Ethan Smith's view of the Hebrews. Cultural skepticism. The idea of golden plates hidden in upstate New York seemed fanciful to outsiders. Persistence of belief. Despite skepticism, the book gained a devoted following that swore to its truth. The Book of Mormon became both the symbol of Mormon devotion and the focus of anti-Mormon ridicule. Early converts and the power of Scripture. Missionary tool. The book was central to early missionary efforts, convincing new converts of the Church's divine mission. Personal testimonies. Many converts described powerful spiritual experiences when reading it. Identity. It became the keystone of Mormon belief, a text unique to their faith and a marker of separation from other Christians. The Book of Mormon gave Mormonism its distinctive identity and theological foundation. Closing reflection. The translation and publication of the Book of Mormon in 1830 marked a turning point in American religious history. To believers, it was proof of divine revelation, a New Testament of Christ's gospel for the modern age. To skeptics, it was an audacious fraud. But whether accepted or rejected, it was impossible to ignore. From a small print shop in Palmyra came a book that would launch a movement, inspire millions, and provoke generations of debate. As you drift into rest, imagine the scene. Joseph dictating by lamplight, Oliver Cowdery writing furiously, Martin Harris anxiously staking his farm, and in the corner, stacks of freshly printed books that would change the course of religious history. Part 4. Building the Early Church. Introduction, From Vision to Organization. The Book of Mormon had been translated and printed by 1830, but a book alone does not make a faith. For Joseph Smith, the next step was to transform Revelations into a living religious community. With a handful of followers, he formally organized the Church of Christ, later renamed the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, on April 6, 1830. What began as a small gathering in a New York farmhouse would grow into a movement with global reach, but its first years were fragile and fraught with tension. The official founding. Date, April 6, 1830, often regarded as the formal birthday of the LDS Church. Location, Fayette, New York, in the home of Peter Whitmer Sr., whose family were among the first believers. Attendees, only about 30 to 40 people were present. First elders, Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery were sustained as the first elders of the church. This small gathering was humble, but it marked the beginning of a movement that claimed divine authority. Early doctrines and practices. Revelation as authority. From the start, Joseph taught that God continued to speak through him, meaning Scripture was ongoing rather than closed. Priesthood authority. The concept of priesthood, power to act in God's name, was emphasized. Joseph and Oliver claimed to have received it through angelic ordination by John the Baptist and later by apostles Peter, James, and John. Baptism and the gift of the Holy Ghost. Converts were baptized by immersion and confirmed by the laying on of hands, practices drawn from both biblical tradition and new revelations. These doctrines set Mormonism apart, presenting it as not merely another Protestant sect but a restoration of ancient authority. Early missionary work. First missions. Even in 1830, missionaries were sent to nearby communities. Parley P. Pratt, one of the earliest converts, became a fiery and influential missionary. Western expansion, a mission to Native Americans, called Lamanite in Mormon teaching, revealed the young church's desire to link its theology with America's indigenous peoples. Success in Ohio. Missionaries in Kirtland, Ohio, found fertile ground, converting Sidney Rigdon, a Campbellite preacher, and many of his followers. These early missions spread Mormonism beyond New York, establishing footholds that would shape its future. Kirtland and the Gathering of Saints. Moved to Ohio, 1831. Within a year, Joseph announced a revelation that the saints should gather in Kirtland, Ohio. Reasons for gathering. The idea of gathering was central to Mormon identity, both for spiritual community and preparation for Christ's return. Growth. The church grew rapidly in Kirtland, attracting hundreds of converts. Kirtland became the first center of Mormon life, where Joseph began to experiment with building institutions. Early challenges and persecution. Ridicule. Neighbors mocked the church's claims of golden plates and new scripture. Violence. Mobs sometimes broke up meetings, seeing the church as dangerous or fraudulent. Internal dissent. Not all early followers remained loyal. Some accused Joseph of fabrication or mismanagement. Persecution became a recurring theme in Mormon history, shaping the church's identity as a people set apart. The development of church leadership. The first presidency. Joseph eventually created a governing presidency of 3 men, beginning to formalize leadership structures. Quorum of the 12 Apostles, modeled after the New Testament, this body of leaders emerged to oversee missionary work and governance. Hierarchy and order. While early congregations were small, they were organized with clear lines of authority, an unusual feature among new sects. From the start, Mormonism emphasized order, leadership, and divine appointment. The role of revelation. Doctrine and Covenants. Joseph continued to receive revelations, which were recorded and published as scripture alongside the Book of Mormon. Living prophethood. Unlike most Protestant churches, Mormons believed revelation was ongoing, with Joseph as God's chosen mouthpiece. Controversial teachings. Some revelations introduced radical new doctrines, including concepts that would later lead to plural marriage. Revelation gave Mormonism both its vitality and its controversy, fueling growth but also opposition. Building a new religious identity. Communal experiments. In Kirtland, Joseph and his followers experimented with forms of communal living, echoing other utopian movements of the time. Temple aspirations. The idea of building a temple, sacred space for higher ordinances, was introduced, marking Mormonism as distinct from other sects. Perpetual opposition. As their identity sharpened, opposition intensified, setting the stage for migrations and conflict. The early years forged a sense of mission and persecution that defined the Mormon character. Closing reflection. The building of the early church was a fragile, uncertain time. From a small farmhouse in New York to the gathering of hundreds in Ohio, Mormonism began its transformation from scripture on a page to a living community of believers. Its emphasis on priesthood authority, continuing revelation, and gathering together set it apart from the restless Protestantism around it. Yet the seeds of conflict, persecution, dissent, radical doctrine were already present. As you drift into rest, imagine the spring of 1830, a small group of men and women in a New York farmhouse, quietly sustaining Joseph Smith as a prophet and pledging themselves to a new faith. They could not have known that their tiny church would one day count millions, nor that its path would be marked by sacrifice, controversy, and resilience. Part 5, Persecution and Flight, Ohio, Missouri, and Illinois. Introduction, A Church on the Move. Barely a year after its founding in 1830, the Church of Christ, soon to be known as the Latter-day Saints, found itself embroiled in conflict. Mormon claims of divine authority, new scripture, and a gathering of believers threatened neighbors, while economic and political tensions inflamed hostilities. What followed was a period of migration, persecution, and violence that tested the survival of Joseph Smith's fledgling church. The promise of Ohio, growth and conflict. Kirtland Gathering, 1831. Joseph Smith declared through revelation that Kirtland, Ohio, would be a temporary gathering place for the saints. Hundreds of converts moved there, swelling the church's numbers. Kirtland Temple. The first Mormon temple was constructed, completed in 1836, a monumental achievement for the young church. It served as a place of worship, visions, and new ordinances. The Kirtland Safety Society, an attempt to establish a church-run bank, collapsed in 1837, leading to financial ruin for many members and disillusionment with Joseph Smith's leadership. Despite its promise, Kirtland became a place of schism and departure for many early followers. Missouri, Zion and expulsion. Zion in Missouri. Joseph taught that Independence, Missouri, was to be the center place of Zion, the New Jerusalem. Mormons flocked to Jackson County. Clashes with locals, their rapid growth, block voting, and distinct religious identity made them targets of suspicion. Conflicts erupted over land, economics, and culture. Violence erupts. 1833 mobs attacked Mormon settlements, destroying property and driving families from their homes. Exile. Many Mormons fled Jackson County for other parts of Missouri, believing Zion was lost, at least temporarily. The dream of Zion turned into a nightmare of violence and expulsion. Escalating tensions in Missouri. Caldwell County. In the late 1830s, Mormons regrouped in northern Missouri, establishing Far West as a new center. The Mormon War of 1838, skirmishes between Mormons and Missourians escalated into open conflict. Haun's Mill Massacre. A mob attacked a Mormon settlement, killing 17 men and boys, one of the darkest episodes in early Mormon history. Extermination Order. Missouri Governor Lilburn Boggs issued an order in October 1838 declaring Mormons must be exterminated or driven from the state. The Missouri conflicts became a defining trauma, shaping the saints' sense of persecution and destiny. Imprisonment of Joseph Smith. Arrest. Following the 1838 conflicts, Joseph Smith and other leaders were arrested. Liberty Jail. Joseph spent the winter of 1838-39 imprisoned in Liberty, Missouri, under harsh conditions. Letters of consolation. From jail, Joseph wrote letters that became part of Mormon scripture, counseling endurance and faith amid suffering. Joseph's imprisonment deepened the sense of prophetic martyrdom and sacrifice. The Illinois Haven, Nauvoo. Flight to Illinois. In 1839, thousands of displaced Mormons crossed into Illinois, where they found a temporary welcome. Nauvoo founded, on the banks of the Mississippi River, they built a new city, Nauvoo, which quickly grew into one of the largest cities in Illinois. Religious freedom. The state legislature granted Nauvoo an unusual degree of autonomy, allowing the saints to govern themselves. Nauvoo Temple. Construction began on another grand temple, symbolizing the resilience of the community. Nauvoo became both a refuge and a new beginning. Seeds of controversy in Nauvoo. Political power. Mormons voted as a bloc, alarming other Illinois citizens. Joseph Smith's authority. As both mayor and prophet, Joseph's power appeared to outsiders as dangerously theocratic. Introduction of new doctrines. It was in Nauvoo that plural marriage began to be taught secretly, foreshadowing later controversy. Nauvoo's growth inspired admiration among believers but suspicion among outsiders. Patterns of persecution and faith. Cycle of conflict. In both Ohio and Missouri, Mormons faced hostility, often due to their rapid growth, economic competition, and religious exclusivity. Theological framing. Joseph and his followers interpreted persecution as evidence of their divine mission, echoing biblical stories of suffering prophets. Forging identity. Each expulsion deepened Mormon solidarity, reinforcing the narrative of a chosen people enduring trials on their way to Zion. Persecution became both a hardship and a source of strength, defining the Latter-day Saint identity. Closing reflection. By 1840, Mormonism had already endured multiple relocations, financial disasters, mob violence, and state-sanctioned expulsion. Yet it had also grown rapidly, built temples, and maintained its prophetic identity under Joseph Smith's leadership. These early migrations, Kirtland, Missouri, Nauvoo, were not simply displacements. They were crucibles in which the faith of the saints was tested, refined, and strengthened. As you drift into rest, picture families crossing the frozen Missouri River, carrying meager possessions, driven from their homes, yet singing hymns of Zion. Theirs was a story of suffering, but also of resilience, setting the stage for even greater trials and greater migrations that lay ahead. Part 6: The Rise of Nauvoo and New Doctrines. Introduction: A New Zion on the Mississippi. After the violent expulsion from Missouri in 1838-39, the Latter-day Saints sought refuge across the Mississippi River in Illinois. There they founded Nauvoo, a city that quickly blossomed from swampy land into one of the largest communities in the state. For a brief period, Nauvoo represented the Mormon dream, a thriving, self-governing, religiously unified city. Yet beneath its success lay new teachings, secret practices, and growing suspicion from outsiders. The founding of Nauvoo. Swamped a city, in 1839, Joseph Smith and church leaders purchased land on a swampy bend of the Mississippi River. Through collective labor, they drained the land and began construction. Rapid growth: within a few years, Nauvoo grew to rival Chicago in population, with over 10,000 inhabitants by the mid-1840s. Charter of Autonomy: the Illinois legislature granted Nauvoo a charter allowing it to operate with unusual independence, its own courts, militia, and university. To Mormon settlers, Nauvoo was proof of divine favor. To outsiders, it looked increasingly like a state within a state. Political power and suspicion. Block voting. The Saints often voted as a unified bloc, wielding significant political influence in Illinois. Joseph Smith's authority, as prophet, mayor, and commander of the Nauvoo Legion, a militia numbering thousands, Joseph combined spiritual and civic power. Suspicion: neighbors worried Nauvoo was becoming a theocracy, its loyalty to Joseph outweighing loyalty to the state. This mixture of spiritual fervor and civic autonomy planted seeds of conflict with surrounding communities. The Nauvoo Temple. Ambitious project. Construction began in 1841, and though incomplete at Joseph Smith's death, it became a central symbol of faith. New ordinances: the temple introduced sacred rituals such as baptisms for the dead and the endowment, distinct from mainstream Christianity. Community effort: saints sacrificed enormously in labor and funds to build the temple, despite poverty and persecution. The Nauvoo Temple became a physical and spiritual anchor for the Mormon people. The emergence of new doctrines. Baptism for the dead: Joseph introduced the idea that living members could be baptized on behalf of deceased ancestors, extending salvation beyond the grave. The King Follett Discourse, 1844. Joseph taught radical doctrines about the nature of God, that God was once a man, and humans could progress to become like God. Plural marriage, secretly practiced by the early 1840s, Joseph and a select circle began practicing plural marriage privately, framing it as a divine commandment. These teachings deepened Mormon distinctiveness and controversy, laying foundations that still shape the faith today. Polygamy in Nauvoo. Introduction: Joseph Smith began marrying additional wives in the early 1840s, often in secrecy. Complexity: some wives were young women, while others were already married to other men. The practice was explained as obedience to divine revelation. Tension: even within the church, plural marriage caused confusion, secrecy, and dissent. Some leaders resisted, others embraced it. Historical legacy: the roots of Mormon polygamy, which would later define the faith's public battles, lay firmly in Nauvoo. Polygamy remained hidden from the public, but whispers spread, adding to suspicions about Mormon secrecy. Growing opposition. Pressures in Illinois: non-Mormon neighbors grew alarmed at Nauvoo's size, independence, and rumors of polygamy. Internal dissent: former leaders, such as William Law, broke with Joseph Smith and published exposés. The Nauvoo Expositor, 1844. A newspaper critical of Joseph Smith's polygamy and authority was destroyed by order of the Nauvoo City Council, inflaming local outrage. This clash would soon lead to tragedy. A city of contradictions. Prosperity and culture: Nauvoo was vibrant, with theaters, schools, and a thriving economy. Faith and secrecy: new doctrines flourished, but secrecy around polygamy created tension. Admiration and fear: to converts, Nauvoo was heaven on earth. To outsiders, it was a threat to democracy. Nauvoo embodied both the promise and peril of Mormon communal life. Closing reflection. The rise of Nauvoo was one of the most dramatic chapters in early Mormon history. From swampy wilderness grew a city of thousands, a temple of stone, and a people unified by faith and sacrifice. Yet Nauvoo was also a place of hidden doctrines, secret marriages, and rising suspicion. Within its walls, Mormonism was transformed, from a struggling sect to a confident community with bold new teachings. But beyond its walls, distrust was growing. As you drift into rest, imagine Nauvoo's bustling streets, families building homes, workers carving stone for the temple, Joseph Smith preaching radical new doctrines, and whispers in the night of plural marriages. The city glowed with faith, but storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Part 7: The Origins of Polygamy. Introduction: A Hidden Revelation. Few aspects of Mormon history have attracted more fascination, controversy, and misunderstanding than the practice of polygamy. Known among early saints as plural marriage or the principle, it emerged quietly in Nauvoo during the early 1840s under Joseph Smith's leadership. To followers, it was presented as a divine commandment, revealed to Joseph by God and tied to eternal salvation. To critics, it was proof of immorality and deception. This chapter explores how polygamy began, the secrecy surrounding it, the lives of those involved, and the storm it created both within and outside the faith. The revelation to Joseph Smith. Early glimpses. As early as the 1830s, Joseph Smith hinted to close associates that God had revealed the possibility of plural marriage, but it was not publicly taught. The commandment. According to later accounts, an angel appeared to Joseph multiple times, commanding him to institute the practice. On one occasion, the angel reportedly threatened him with destruction if he refused. Scriptural foundation. In 1843, Joseph dictated a revelation, later canonized as Doctrine and Covenants section 132, that justified plural marriage as a restoration of Old Testament practice, connecting it to the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The revelation was both radical and deeply rooted in biblical precedent. Early secret marriages. Joseph's first plural wives. Historical records suggest Joseph began taking additional wives as early as the mid-1830s, but the practice accelerated in Nauvoo in the early 1840s. The circle of trust. Only a small group of church leaders were initially aware. Joseph introduced the practice to them cautiously, often in secret ceremonies. Secrecy. Plural marriages were kept hidden from the broader membership, and even from many of Joseph's close associates. Secrecy created an atmosphere of tension, with whispers circulating inside and outside Nauvoo. The women involved. Variety of circumstances. Joseph's plural wives included young women in their late teens, widows in need of support, and even women who were already married to other men, a practice historians call polyandry. Consent and conflict. Some women embraced the principle as a sacred commandment, while others resisted or felt deep anguish. Prominent figures. Among Joseph's wives were Emma Hale Smith, his first and legal wife, who struggled greatly with the practice, and Eliza R. Snow, a poet and leader who later defended plural marriage. These women's stories reveal the human complexity behind a doctrine presented as divine. The role of Emma Smith. Initial opposition. Emma, Joseph's first wife, resisted polygamy fiercely. She vacillated between reluctant acceptance and outright rejection. Tensions in marriage. Accounts suggest Joseph and Emma's relationship was deeply strained by plural marriage. Emma's position later. After Joseph's death, Emma denied that he had ever practiced polygamy, a claim that became central to later divisions in the Mormon movement. Emma's conflicted role highlights the personal cost of introducing polygamy. Expansion among church leaders. Trusted inner circle. Joseph introduced plural marriage to trusted leaders like Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, and others, who began taking plural wives themselves. Doctrine of exaltation. Leaders framed polygamy as tied to eternal glory, the idea that family connections sealed by priesthood power would endure beyond death. sacrifice and obedience. Many accepted the practice reluctantly, seeing it as a test of faith and loyalty. For those who embraced it, plural marriage was not about desire but about religious duty. Growing rumors and dissent. Community whispers. Though practiced in secret, rumors spread rapidly in Nauvoo. Outsiders accused Joseph of immorality, while insiders debated the principle's legitimacy. William Law's opposition. Once a close associate of Joseph, Law broke with him over polygamy and other issues. In 1844 he published the Nauvoo Expositor, exposing the practice. Explosion of tensions. The destruction of the Expositor's press by Nauvoo authorities ignited outrage, leading directly to Joseph Smith's arrest and eventual death. Thus, polygamy was central to the events that culminated in Joseph Smith's martyrdom. Theological justifications. Biblical precedent. Leaders pointed to Old Testament patriarchs who had multiple wives. Restoration principle. They argued that God was restoring all ancient practices in preparation for the last days. Eternal families. Plural marriage was tied to the idea of sealing families united for eternity, not just for mortal life. To believers, polygamy was a sacred, if painful, doctrine tied to salvation itself. The cost of secrecy. Division among members. Many ordinary saints did not know of polygamy until years later, creating division when it became public. External hostility. For outsiders, rumors of Mormon polygamy reinforced the perception of Mormonism as immoral and dangerous. Joseph's death. Ultimately, opposition to polygamy and other aspects of Joseph's authority contributed directly to his assassination in 1844. The origins of polygamy not only reshaped Mormon theology but also set the stage for violence and martyrdom. Closing reflection. The origins of Mormon polygamy were hidden, complicated, and deeply human. Introduced by Joseph Smith as a divine commandment, it was practiced in secret by a small circle of leaders and families in Nauvoo. To the faithful, it was a test of obedience and a promise of eternal glory. To the uninitiated and to critics, it was deception and immorality. The secrecy surrounding plural marriage inflamed suspicion, fractured trust, and helped spark the crisis that ended in Joseph Smith's death. As you drift into rest, imagine Nauvoo in the 1840s, a city bustling with faith and optimism, yet beneath the surface, a quiet network of secret marriages binding leaders and families together. A practice meant to seal eternal families instead sealed the fate of Joseph Smith, shaping Mormonism's path for generations. Part 8: The Martyrdom of Joseph Smith. Introduction: A Prophet in Peril. By 1844, Joseph Smith had risen from a poor farm boy in New York to the leader of a thriving city on the Mississippi River. Nauvoo's population swelled, its temple neared completion, and Joseph himself wielded spiritual, political, and military power. Yet the same authority that inspired his followers provoked intense opposition. Rumors of polygamy, accusations of tyranny, and growing suspicion from neighbors outside Nauvoo created a storm of hostility. It was in this atmosphere that Joseph Smith met his death, a martyrdom that would forever shape Mormon identity. Rising tensions in Nauvoo. Political power. As mayor of Nauvoo and commander of the Nauvoo Legion, Joseph Smith was more than a religious leader, he was a statesman and military figure. To outsiders, this concentration of power seemed dangerous. Rumors of polygamy, though still secret, whispers of plural marriage circulated, fueling accusations of immorality and deception. Economic rivalries. The rapid growth of Nauvoo created resentment among neighbors who feared Mormon dominance in trade and politics. The presidential campaign. In 1844, Joseph Smith even launched a campaign for President of the United States, heightening fears of Mormon ambition. The convergence of religion, politics, and secrecy created an explosive situation. Internal dissent and the Nauvoo Expositor. William Law's break. Once a trusted counselor in the church's first presidency, William Law grew disillusioned, particularly over polygamy and Joseph's political power. The Expositor newspaper. In June 1844, Law and other dissenters published the Nauvoo Expositor, accusing Joseph of introducing polygamy and abusing his authority. City Council action. The Nauvoo City Council, with Joseph as mayor, declared the paper a public nuisance and ordered the press destroyed. The destruction of the Expositor outraged Illinois citizens, who saw it as an assault on freedom of the press. The call for arrest. State outrage. Illinois officials demanded Joseph and his associates stand trial for destroying the press. Reluctance to surrender. Fearing mob violence, Joseph at first considered fleeing westward, but ultimately chose to face charges. The fateful decision. If my life is of no value to my friends, he reportedly told his brother Hiram, it is of none to myself. With that, Joseph returned to Illinois authorities. His decision to surrender sealed his fate. Carthage Jail. Imprisonment. In late June 1844, Joseph, Hiram Smith, and other leaders were confined in Carthage Jail, about 20 miles from Nauvoo. The setting. The jail was a two-story brick building where the men were guarded by a small force of state militia. Growing threat. Rumors swirled that local militias planned to storm the jail. Despite reassurances from Governor Thomas Ford, Joseph and his companions sensed death approaching. The martyrdom. June 27, 1844. The mob. On the afternoon of June 27, a mob of 100 to 200 men, their faces painted to disguise their identities, stormed the jail. The attack. They rushed the upstairs room where Joseph, Hiram, John Taylor, and Willard Richards were held. Hiram's death. Hiram Smith was struck by gunfire almost immediately, collapsing with the words, "I am a dead man." Joseph's final moments. Joseph fired a small pistol in defense, but was overwhelmed. Shot multiple times, he staggered to the window and fell to the ground outside, crying, "O Lord, my God." Survivors. John Taylor was severely wounded but survived. Willard Richards escaped with only minor injuries. The prophet and his brother were dead. Aftermath in Nauvoo. Shock and mourning. News of the murders devastated the saints in Nauvoo. Many wept openly in the streets, while others feared annihilation by hostile neighbors. Governor's response. Governor Ford condemned the mob, though many suspected complicity from local officials. Martyrdom narrative. For believers, Joseph and Hiram were martyrs for truth, sealed in death as witnesses of the restored gospel. The murders deepened Mormon identity as a persecuted, chosen people. Legacy of the martyrdom. Succession crisis. With Joseph gone, the question of who would lead the church created immediate division. Symbol of sacrifice. Mormon leaders portrayed Joseph and Hiram as having given their lives for religious liberty. Polarization. Outsiders viewed Joseph's death as the fall of a dangerous leader, insiders saw it as the unjust murder of a prophet. The martyrdom became both tragedy and rallying cry, shaping Mormon memory for generations. Closing reflection. The martyrdom of Joseph Smith in 1844 was both inevitable and shocking. His bold claims, political power, and secret introduction of polygamy had created a tinderbox of resentment. Yet his death transformed him from a controversial leader into a martyr, binding his followers more tightly to the faith he founded. As you drift into sleep, imagine the quiet jail in Carthage, the crack of gunfire, the fall of Joseph from the window, and the grief of his followers in Nauvoo. Out of blood and loss, a movement was sealed, its prophet gone, but its destiny yet unfolding. Part 9, Brigham Young and the Trek West. Introduction, a church without its prophet. The murder of Joseph and Hiram Smith in Carthage Jail in June 1844 left the Latter-day Saints leaderless and vulnerable. The grief was immense, but so too was the urgency. Who would guide the church now? Without a clear plan of succession, rival claimants stepped forward. Out of this uncertainty emerged Brigham Young, a fiery apostle with an iron will, who would lead the saints on one of the most extraordinary migrations in American history. The succession crisis. Uncertainty after Joseph's death. Joseph had hinted at various possibilities for succession but left no universally recognized heir. Candidates. Sidney Rigdon, once Joseph's counselor, claimed to be the church's guardian. Others looked to members of Joseph's family. Brigham Young's rise. As president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, Young asserted that the apostles collectively held the keys of leadership. At a dramatic meeting in Nauvoo, many saints reported seeing Brigham Young transfigured, his voice and appearance resembling Joseph's. This spiritual experience convinced the majority that Young was chosen to lead. Consolidating authority. Firm leadership. Brigham Young quickly demonstrated his style, practical, commanding, and focused on survival. Loyalty to the apostles. He emphasized collective leadership through the 12, though he clearly became the dominant figure. Emma Smith and the family division. Joseph's widow, Emma, resisted Brigham's authority and denied polygamy, later forming the nucleus of the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, RLDS. The split with Emma foreshadowed enduring divisions in the Mormon movement. The crisis in Nauvoo. External pressure. Neighbors in Illinois demanded the removal of the saints, fearing their power and rumors of polygamy. Internal strain. Some disaffected members broke away, but the majority followed Brigham Young. Decision to leave. By 1845, it was clear the saints could not remain in Illinois. Persecution and violence mounted, culminating in the so-called Battle of Nauvoo in 1846, when remaining Mormons were forced from the city. Nauvoo, once a thriving city, became another lost Zion. Planning the trek west. Revelation of gathering. Joseph had prophesied the saints would move to the Rocky Mountains, a place where the saints would become mighty. Practical preparation. Brigham organized companies, wagons, supplies, and routes with military precision. Winter quarters. In late 1846, thousands of saints camped along the Missouri River in Iowa and Nebraska, enduring cold and disease as they prepared for the Great Migration. The Exodus was both spiritual mission and logistical nightmare. The Great Migration, 1847. The Vanguard Company. In April 1847, Brigham Young led a pioneer company of about 143 men, 3 women, and 2 children westward. The journey, following trails used by earlier explorers and fur traders, they crossed plains, rivers, and mountains. Arrival in the Salt Lake Valley. On July 24, 1847, the pioneers reached the Salt Lake Valley. Brigham declared, "This is the right place. Drive on." The barren desert seemed inhospitable, but it would become the heart of Mormon settlement. Building Zion in the desert. Organized colonization. Under Brigham's direction, the saints irrigated fields, built homes, and laid out Salt Lake City with wide streets and a central temple square. Communal effort. The settlement required strict discipline and collective labor, hallmarks of Brigham's leadership. Expansion. Over the next decade, Mormon colonies spread across Utah, Idaho, Arizona, Nevada, and California. Against all odds, a people driven from state to state built a thriving civilization in the desert. The trek's symbolism. Exodus parallel. The migration was framed as a modern Exodus, with Brigham as a new Moses leading God's people to a promised land. Sacrifice and faith. Thousands endured hunger, disease, and exhaustion, burying loved ones along the trail. Identity. The trek became central to Mormon identity, symbolizing perseverance and divine destiny. Stories of the trek are still recounted as sacred history among Latter-day Saints today. Closing reflection. The succession crisis after Joseph Smith's death could have destroyed Mormonism. Instead, under Brigham Young's leadership, the church found both a leader and a new destiny. The trek west was more than a migration, it was a rebirth, transforming the saints from persecuted wanderers into builders of Zion. As you drift into sleep, picture the long wagon train stretching across the plains, oxen pulling weary families, Brigham Young at the head, scanning the horizon. Behind them lay Nauvoo, Carthage, and bloodshed. Ahead lay a desert valley that would become their refuge and their future. Part 10. Polygamy in Utah Territory. Introduction. From secrecy to open practice. In Nauvoo, polygamy had been practiced in secrecy, known only to a select circle of leaders and families. But after Joseph Smith's death and the exodus to Utah, Brigham Young and other apostles gradually brought the practice into the open. In the isolation of the Great Basin, far from the scrutiny of Eastern newspapers and politicians, plural marriage became not just a hidden principle but a defining feature of Mormon society. Its defenders saw it as obedience to divine commandment, its critics condemned it as barbaric. Utah became the epicenter of one of the most controversial social experiments in American history. Brigham Young and public acknowledgement. Leadership shift. Under Brigham Young, polygamy was reframed as central to the saints' covenant with God. Announcement. By the early 1850s, church leaders publicly acknowledged the practice, marking a dramatic shift from Nauvoo secrecy. Defiance of outsiders. Young insisted that plural marriage was a religious principle revealed by God, not subject to outside interference. This public acknowledgement shocked America and set Utah on a collision course with the federal government. The theology of plural marriage. Eternal families. Plural marriage was tied to the doctrine of exaltation, families sealed for eternity, multiplying glory in the afterlife. Patriarchal order. Leaders taught that plural marriage restored the patriarchal model of Old Testament prophets like Abraham and Jacob. Test of faith. Many leaders described it as one of the hardest commandments, a trial of obedience to God over worldly judgment. For believers, polygamy was not about lust or abundance but about salvation and duty. Everyday life in polygamous families. Households. Some families lived together under one roof, others maintained separate homes for each wife. Economics. Polygamy often strained resources, but collective labor helped families survive. Women's perspectives. Experiences varied. Some women embraced the principle as sacred, while others endured loneliness, jealousy, and hardship. Children. Polygamous households produced large numbers of children, creating sprawling family networks. The lived reality of plural marriage was diverse, sometimes harmonious, often difficult, but always central to Mormon society. The scale of polygamy in Utah. Estimates. Historians estimate that 20 to 30% of Mormon families practiced polygamy at its peak in the mid-19th century. Leadership example. Most top church leaders, including Brigham Young, who had more than 50 wives, practiced polygamy. Cultural identity. For many, participation was a marker of commitment to the faith. Plural marriage became a defining line between the saints and the wider American culture. National outrage. American reaction. Outsiders viewed polygamy as immoral, often calling it a twin relic of barbarism, the other being slavery. Media sensation. Newspapers portrayed Utah as a land of licentiousness and oppression of women. Political debate. Anti-polygamy sentiment united both Northerners and Southerners, even amid sectional divisions before the Civil War. To America, polygamy became synonymous with Mormonism, and an affront to Christian values. Government response. Territorial tensions. Utah became a U.S. territory in 1850, but conflicts with federal officials quickly arose. Utah War, 1857 to 1858. President James Buchanan sent troops to suppress what he saw as rebellion in Utah. While little blood was shed, the conflict deepened mistrust. Anti-polygamy legislation. Congress passed laws in the 1860s and 1870s criminalizing plural marriage, though enforcement was difficult in Utah's isolation. The clash between Mormon Utah and the federal government was as much about sovereignty as about marriage. Women in polygamy. Agency. Some women defended polygamy, testifying it gave them independence, sisterhood, and spiritual fulfillment. Resistance. Others resisted, quietly or openly, struggling with jealousy and emotional strain. Public voices. Women like Eliza R. Snow and Emmeline B. Wells spoke publicly in defense of the principle, countering outsider claims that Mormon women were victims. The voices of women in polygamy were complex, refusing easy categorization as oppressed or liberated. Cultural isolation and unity. Zion in the desert. Plural marriage reinforced the saints' sense of being a people apart, chosen and tested. Community cohesion. The practice bound families and leaders together in vast networks, creating social cohesion in the wilderness. Insider/outsider divide. To insiders, polygamy was sacred obedience. To outsiders, it was a scandalous defiance of American norms. This isolation strengthened Mormon identity, even as it fueled hostility from the outside world. Closing reflection. In Utah, polygamy moved from secrecy to open practice, transforming Mormon society and provoking national outrage. For the saints, it was a divine principle, tying them to eternity and setting them apart as God's chosen people. For the nation, it was a shocking violation of morality, a stain on America's character. The practice would define Utah's first half-century, shaping not only Mormon theology but also the political and cultural battles that lay ahead. As you drift into rest, picture the Salt Lake Valley in the 1850s, adobe houses scattered across the desert plain, families gathered in prayer, women managing households, children filling classrooms, and Brigham Young declaring defiantly that this was the way of God. In the heart of the desert, plural marriage was not just a practice but a principle, shaping the destiny of a people. Part 11, Conflict with the U.S. Government. Introduction, a territory in rebellion. By the mid-19th century, the open practice of polygamy in Utah had made the Latter-day Saints a target of the United States government. While Mormons saw plural marriage as a divine commandment, Americans across the political spectrum condemned it as immoral and unchristian. To them, it was not simply a matter of private faith but a threat to the moral order of the Republic. The resulting clash between Utah Territory and Washington, D.C., spanned decades, marked by legislation, raids, trials, and resistance. The twin relics of barbarism. Political context. In the 1850s, as the nation wrestled with the expansion of slavery, politicians grouped polygamy with slavery as the twin relics of barbarism. Moral campaign. Just as abolitionists sought to eradicate slavery, many reformers demanded an end to polygamy. Mormon defiance. Church leaders, however, framed plural marriage as obedience to God, even if it meant disobedience to human law. Thus, the saints found themselves aligned against the mainstream of American political culture. The Utah War, 1857 to 1858. Federal suspicion. Reports of theocratic control and polygamy in Utah convinced President James Buchanan that the territory was in rebellion. Military expedition. He dispatched an army to install a new governor and assert federal authority, sparking the so-called Utah War. Mormon resistance. Brigham Young declared martial law, mobilized the Nauvoo Legion, and prepared to defend the saints. Resolution. While violence was limited, the crisis ended with a negotiated settlement. Young relinquished the governorship, but the saints retained autonomy. The Utah War cemented the perception of Utah as a territory in tension with the Union. The Morrill Anti-Bigamy Act, 1862. First federal law. Congress passed the Morrill Act criminalizing plural marriage in U.S. territories. Civil War overshadowing. With the Civil War raging, enforcement was minimal at first. Church response. Leaders denounced the law as unconstitutional, insisting that religious commandments superseded federal statutes. The stage was set for decades of legal conflict between the saints and the nation. The Edmunds Act, 1882. Stricter measures. This law made unlawful cohabitation a crime, allowing for easier prosecution of polygamists. Disenfranchisement. It stripped polygamists of the right to vote, hold office, or serve on juries. Widespread arrests. Federal marshals began arresting church leaders and ordinary members alike. The Edmunds Act marked the beginning of aggressive federal campaigns against polygamy. The Edmunds-Tucker Act, 1887. Severe penalties. This law dissolved the LDS Church as a legal entity, confiscated church property, and required wives to testify against husbands in court. Imprisonment of leaders. Many top officials, including apostles, went into hiding or served prison sentences. Families in hiding. Plural families often lived in secrecy, with men on the run to avoid capture. The law struck at the very survival of the church as an institution. Mormon resistance and defiance. The underground, polygamous men hid from marshals, often moving from house to house in disguise. Heroic narrative. Within the church, those who endured arrest or imprisonment were celebrated as martyrs for the principle. Continued practice. Despite intense pressure, leaders encouraged faithfulness to plural marriage, even at great cost. This defiance reinforced the saints' identity as a persecuted people. Women and the public battle. Women's defense. Mormon women publicly defended polygamy, arguing it was chosen freely and spiritually enriching. Petitions and speeches. Thousands of women signed petitions and gave lectures in Washington, challenging stereotypes of oppression. Complex reality. While women defended their faith publicly, many privately struggled with jealousy, poverty, and emotional strain. The women of polygamy became both defenders of their community and symbols in the national debate. The turning point, toward the Manifesto. Mounting pressure. By the late 1880s, with church property seized and leaders imprisoned, survival was at stake. Spiritual dilemma. Leaders prayed for divine guidance. Could polygamy continue, or was it time to yield? Wilford Woodruff's role. As church president, Woodruff sought revelation on the matter, preparing to announce a dramatic shift. The decades-long war between the U.S. government and the saints was approaching its climax. Closing reflection. The conflict between the LDS Church and the United States government over polygamy was one of the longest and most bitter religious controversies in American history. For nearly half a century, Mormon leaders insisted they were obeying God, while the government insisted they were breaking the law. Raids, imprisonments, confiscations, and defiance turned Utah into a battleground between church and state. As you drift into sleep, picture a plural family in the 1880s, a husband in hiding, wives managing households alone, children whispering at the sound of hoofbeats. Was it father returning, or marshals at the door? In that tension lay the daily life of faith and resistance, as the saints stood against the nation in defense of a principle. Part 12, The Manifesto and the End of Official Polygamy. Introduction, A Church at the Brink. By the late 1880s, the conflict between the LDS Church and the United States had reached a breaking point. Federal laws had criminalized polygamy, marshals were arresting and imprisoning church leaders, and the government had seized significant church property. The very survival of the institution seemed in doubt. It was in this crucible of pressure that President Wilford Woodruff issued what came to be known as the Manifesto in 1890, a revelation that declared an end to the practice of plural marriage as official church doctrine. This moment marked one of the most dramatic turning points in Mormon history. Mounting pressure. Seizure of property. The Edmunds-Tucker Act had dissolved the corporate status of the LDS Church, allowing the federal government to confiscate land and assets, including temples. Imprisonments. Leaders were jailed, and families lived in constant fear of raids. The Mormon underground had become unsustainable. Political stakes. Utah's bid for statehood was blocked repeatedly, with polygamy cited as the chief obstacle. The church faced existential choices: persist in defiance and risk destruction, or adapt and survive. Wilford Woodruff's leadership. Fourth president of the church, Woodruff, an aging but respected apostle, became church president in 1889. Search for revelation. He and other leaders wrestled with the dilemma of obedience to divine commandment versus preservation of the church. Reported vision. Woodruff later said he was shown in vision what would happen if the church continued to resist: the temples lost, leaders imprisoned, and the faith crippled. For Woodruff, the choice became clear: God required a change. The 1890 Manifesto. Official declaration. In September 1890, Woodruff issued the Manifesto, formerly known as Official Declaration 1. Key statement: he declared that the church would submit to U.S. law and that no further plural marriages would be solemnized. Church acceptance. At the October 1890 General Conference, the saints voted to sustain the Manifesto as binding. It was a stunning reversal, ending decades of defiance. Reactions among the saints. Relief. Many welcomed the change, weary of persecution, imprisonment, and hiding. Confusion. Others, deeply committed to polygamy as a divine principle, felt betrayed. Continued practice. Some marriages continued secretly for a time, especially in Mexico and Canada, where Mormon colonies had been established to escape U.S. law. The Manifesto marked an end, but not an immediate erasure, of polygamy. National response. Positive reception. The U.S. government accepted the Manifesto as good faith, reopening the path to Utah statehood. Skepticism. Many outsiders doubted whether the saints would truly abandon the practice. Legal relief. Seized properties were eventually returned, and prosecutions slowed. The announcement began a slow reconciliation between Mormonism and the American nation. Utah statehood, 1896. Finally admitted, after decades of resistance, Utah was admitted as the 45th state in 1896. New identity. Utah now entered the Union as a loyal state, no longer defined by open rebellion against federal law. Lingering tensions. Despite statehood, suspicions of secret plural marriages continued to haunt Mormonism for years. Statehood symbolized the saints' acceptance into the American fold, but the shadow of polygamy remained. Theological adjustments. Polygamy is eternal. Many saints still believe plural marriage was eternal, even if suspended in mortality. Dual narratives. Leaders emphasized obedience to current revelation, framing the Manifesto as equally divine as the command to practice polygamy. Faith in adaptation. The idea that God could direct changes to preserve his people became a cornerstone of LDS thought. Adaptation became a defining feature of the faith's survival. Legacy of the Manifesto. End of official practice. While plural marriage continued underground for a time, the Manifesto effectively ended its place in mainstream Mormonism. Schisms. Some members broke away, forming fundamentalist sects dedicated to continuing polygamy. Cultural memory. Within the LDS Church, polygamy was reframed as a trial of faith for an earlier generation, not a practice for the present. The Manifesto did not erase polygamy's legacy but redefined it. Closing reflection. The Manifesto of 1890 marked the end of official polygamy and the beginning of Mormonism's integration into the American mainstream. For half a century, the saints had resisted the government in defense of what they saw as a divine principle. Now, under pressure, they changed course, choosing survival over defiance. The revelation preserved the church, secured statehood for Utah, and allowed the faith to flourish worldwide. As you drift into rest, picture Wilford Woodruff in prayer, torn between loyalty to the past and the survival of his people. In his decision, the course of Mormon history turned, an end to polygamy as a living practice, and a new chapter for a faith stepping into the modern age. Part 13, 20th Century Modernization. Introduction, From Frontier Sect to Modern Faith. The issuance of the 1890 Manifesto formally ending plural marriage ushered Mormonism into a new era. No longer defined by open defiance of the U.S. government, the LDS Church now turned its attention to survival, adaptation, and integration into mainstream American life. The 20th century saw the saints abandon their insular frontier identity and transform into a modern, global religion. Life after the Manifesto. Lingering polygamy. Though officially ended, some plural marriages continued in secrecy, especially in colonies in Mexico and Canada. Second Manifesto, 1904. Under President Joseph F. Smith, the Church issued a stronger statement, threatening excommunication for those who entered new plural marriages. Fundamentalist breakaways. These stricter policies led to the rise of fundamentalist groups who rejected the mainstream church and continued polygamy. The LDS Church thus redefined itself while polygamy lived on at the margins. Utah's new identity. Statehood, 1896. With plural marriage officially abandoned, Utah was admitted to the Union. Civic participation. Latter-day Saints increasingly held public office, served in the military, and participated in American institutions. Respectability. Leaders emphasized loyalty to the Constitution, distancing the church from its earlier defiance of federal law. Utah shifted from a rebellious territory to a patriotic state. Institutional growth. Temples and chapels. The early 20th century saw new temple construction, including in Canada and Hawaii, signaling global ambitions. Education. The church invested in schools, seminaries, and universities, with Brigham Young University becoming the flagship. Welfare program. During the Great Depression, the Church created a welfare system to care for its members, reinforcing communal responsibility. These institutions modernized the Church while maintaining its unique culture. Cultural shifts. Family ideal. With polygamy gone, the Church emphasized the nuclear family as its central unit. Women's roles. Mormon women remained active in relief society and education, though their public defense of polygamy faded into memory. Patriotism. During both World Wars, Mormon leaders encouraged military service, aligning the faith with national causes. The Church's message moved from isolation to integration. Growth beyond the Rockies. Missionary expansion. Thousands of young men and women served missions worldwide, spreading the Book of Mormon across continents. International membership. By mid-century, significant congregations emerged in Europe, Latin America, and the Pacific Islands. Language and culture. Missionaries translated scriptures and adapted practices for global contexts, broadening the faith's appeal. The once regional sect became an international religion. The Church and race. Priesthood ban. For much of its history, black men of African descent were barred from holding the priesthood. Criticism. This restriction increasingly drew criticism during the Civil Rights era. 1978 revelation. Under President Spencer W. Kimball, the Church announced a revelation extending priesthood to all worthy male members, a watershed moment in modernization. This decision opened the way for truly global growth. Media and public image. Tabernacle Choir. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir gained worldwide acclaim, symbolizing the Church's cultural contributions. Public relations. Leaders invested in media campaigns to present the faith as wholesome, family-centered, and patriotic. Stereotypes. Despite efforts, public fascination with polygamy persisted, often overshadowing the Church's modern identity. The LDS Church sought to project itself as both distinctly Mormon and fully American. Theological stability and adaptation. Scriptures. The Book of Mormon remained central, supplemented by Doctrine and Covenants revelations. Modern prophets. Each new church president was sustained as a prophet, seer, and revelator, reinforcing continuity. Adaptation. From welfare systems to civil rights, the Church framed adjustments as divinely guided revelations, not concessions to society. Adaptability ensured the Church's survival and growth in the modern world. Closing reflection. The 20th century was a time of transformation for Mormonism. From a persecuted frontier sect associated with polygamy, it evolved into a respected, international religion known for its family values, missionary work, and institutional strength. The abandonment of polygamy, the embrace of statehood, and the extension of priesthood to all races redefined the Church for a new era. As you drift into sleep, imagine the shift. Nauvoo's secret marriages replaced by clean-cut missionaries on bicycles, the desert refuge turned into bustling Salt Lake City, and the Church once hunted by marshals now broadcasting its choir worldwide. Mormonism had survived its trials, and entered the modern age. Part 14. Polygamist Splinter Groups. Introduction. Faithful to the principle. When the LDS Church issued the Manifesto in 1890 and reaffirmed it in 1904, mainstream Mormonism officially ended the practice of plural marriage. For many members, weary from decades of persecution, the change was welcome. But for others, it was unthinkable. To them, polygamy, the principle, was not just a practice but an eternal commandment. They saw the Church's retreat as a betrayal of Joseph Smith's revelation and Brigham Young's legacy. From this dissent grew a variety of splinter movements that would preserve polygamy into the 20th and 21st centuries. The birth of Mormon fundamentalism. Post-Manifesto marriages. Despite the ban, some church leaders quietly sanctioned plural marriages into the early 1900s. When this was discovered, the Second Manifesto, 1904, made enforcement strict. Excommunications. Those who refused to abandon polygamy were cut off from the LDS Church. Fundamentalist identity. Believers saw themselves as the true heirs of Joseph Smith, holding fast to the original commandments. Thus emerged the Mormon fundamentalist movement, a patchwork of communities dedicated to preserving plural marriage. Early colonies in Mexico and Canada. Mexican settlements. Before the Manifesto, Mormons had already established colonies in Mexico, partly as safe havens for polygamists. Canadian communities. Similar settlements arose in Alberta, where plural marriage could be practiced with less scrutiny. Oases of the principle. These colonies provided refuge for families who refused to give up polygamy after 1890. The international dimension of Mormon settlement ensured plural marriage survived beyond U.S. law. Prominent fundamentalist groups. Short Creek, Hilldale, Utah and Colorado City, Arizona. This became one of the most prominent polygamist communities, surviving into the 20th century and becoming the heart of modern fundamentalism. FLDS, Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Emerging in the mid-20th century, the FLDS grew under leaders like Leroy Johnson and later Warren Jeffs, who wielded near-total control. AUB, Apostolic United Brethren. Another prominent group, often more moderate, with communities in Utah and beyond. These groups diverged in leadership and practice but shared commitment to plural marriage. Life in fundamentalist communities. Family networks. Polygamy created sprawling kinship webs that bound communities tightly together. Religious authority. Leaders often held extraordinary power, with marriages arranged by priesthood authority. Isolation. Many fundamentalist settlements kept themselves apart from mainstream society, suspicious of outsiders. Women and children. Daily life often revolved around large families, communal labor, and strict religious expectations. These communities echoed early Utah Mormonism, though in miniature and often under siege. Conflict with the law. Short Creek Raid, 1953. Arizona authorities raided the polygamous town of Short Creek, arresting men and separating families. The raid backfired, creating sympathy for the polygamists and weakening public support for such interventions. Prosecutions. Leaders faced periodic imprisonment, but prosecutions were inconsistent. Warren Jeffs era. In the early 2000s, FLDS leader Warren Jeffs was prosecuted for arranging underage marriages, drawing worldwide attention to polygamy once more. Legal battles highlighted both the persistence and vulnerability of fundamentalist groups. Relationship with the mainstream LDS Church. Excommunication. Fundamentalists were expelled and disowned by the LDS Church, which sought to distance itself from polygamy. Shared origins. Despite separation, fundamentalists insisted they were preserving the true legacy of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. Tension. To the LDS Church, fundamentalists were a nuisance and a reminder of a past it was eager to move beyond. The mainstream church's global respectability was shadowed by associations with polygamist offshoots. Women's voices and experiences. Varied stories. Some women testified to joy, spiritual fulfillment, and strong sisterhood within plural marriage. Others described control, abuse, and loss of autonomy. Literature and testimony. Memoirs and exposés by former fundamentalist women offered contrasting views, both affirming the faith and condemning its extremes. Complex realities. As in early Utah, polygamy in the 20th century was not a single story but many, shaped by faith, culture, and power. Women's experiences remain central to understanding these communities. Persistence into the present. Numbers. Tens of thousands of fundamentalist Mormons still practice polygamy in North America. Visibility. Television shows, news stories, and memoirs have brought modern polygamy into public view, often sensationalized. Continuity. Despite legal and social opposition, the principle endures, carried by those who see it as essential to salvation. The legacy of plural marriage did not end with the 1890 Manifesto, it simply transformed. Closing reflection. Mormonism's official abandonment of polygamy in 1890 reshaped the faith into a mainstream American religion. But for some, the commandment was too sacred to abandon. Out of exile and excommunication, splinter groups arose, small, insular, but fiercely committed to the principle. Their survival into the 21st century demonstrates the enduring power of belief, even when cut off from the institutional church. As you drift into rest, picture the quiet desert communities of southern Utah and northern Arizona, simple homes, large families, and whispered prayers that they remain faithful to the covenant their forebears once cherished. In these settlements, time seems to echo the 19th century, preserving a legacy the mainstream sought to leave behind. Part 15: The LDS Church and American Expansion. Introduction: From a regional sect to a national church. By the early 20th century, the LDS Church had survived persecution, migration, polygamy, and conflict with the United States government. With the Manifesto ending plural marriage, Utah admitted to the Union, and the Church reorienting itself as a loyal American institution, a new chapter began. This era was marked by expansion in membership, in institutions, and in influence. Mormonism was no longer simply a religion of the Rockies. It was becoming a faith with a broad American presence and aspirations to be global. The foundations of expansion. Post-Manifesto stabilization. With polygamy renounced, the Church could operate openly without fear of raids or confiscation. Statehood achieved. Utah's admission in 1896 provided legitimacy and allowed Mormons to participate fully in American civic life. Cultural shift. Church leaders emphasized patriotism, family, and clean living as central identity markers, aligning closely with mainstream American values. The new Mormon image was one of integration rather than isolation. Institutional growth in America. Temples. New temples were constructed in Laie, Hawaii, 1919, and Cardston, Alberta, 1923, signaling expansion beyond Utah. Later temples in Idaho and California reflected Mormonism's westward growth. Education. Seminaries and institutes of religion expanded, providing faith-based education to young members across the country. Brigham Young University, BYU, flourished, producing graduates who would help shape Mormonism's role in American society. These institutions gave the LDS Church permanence and influence beyond the Intermountain West. Missionary work across the nation. The missionary program, thousands of young men, and increasingly women, were sent throughout the United States to preach the Book of Mormon. Standardization. Missionary training became more organized, with emphasis on discipline and uniformity. Public image. Missionaries in suits, traveling by foot, bike, or later car, became iconic symbols of Mormon presence. This effort spread Mormonism into urban centers, small towns, and rural communities alike. The Mormon family ideal. After polygamy, with plural marriage no longer defining Mormon identity, the Church emphasized the nuclear family. Proclamation of values. Leaders taught that the family was central to God's plan, with temples sealing families for time and all eternity. Cultural distinctiveness. Large families, abstinence from alcohol and tobacco, and strict moral codes distinguished Mormon households. This image of disciplined, family-oriented life became a key to the Church's public acceptance. Participation in national life. Politics. Mormons increasingly held elected office, both in Utah and nationally, demonstrating loyalty to the Union. Military service. Latter-day Saints served in both world wars, reinforcing their reputation as patriotic citizens. Public service. Church members participated in relief efforts during natural disasters, earning admiration for their organization and discipline. From rebels to patriots, Mormonism's transformation was nearly complete. Media and perception. Positive portrayals. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir gained national attention, performing on radio and at presidential inaugurations. Persistent stereotypes. Polygamy, though officially abandoned, continued to color public perceptions, often resurfacing in fiction and journalism. Public relations. The Church began investing in deliberate campaigns to present itself as mainstream, emphasizing Christ-centered theology and wholesome values. The tension between old stereotypes and new identity persisted throughout the century. Expanding membership. Growth in numbers. Membership swelled from a few 100,000 at the turn of the century to millions by mid-century. Geographic spread. Congregations spread beyond the West into the Midwest, South, and East Coast. Assimilation. Mormon communities blended more seamlessly into American towns, no longer seen as outsiders but as neighbors. The LDS Church was no longer just Utah's faith, it was becoming an American one. Challenges of expansion. Urbanization. Moving into big cities required adjustments in worship style and community organization. Diversity. As Mormonism spread into regions with greater racial and cultural diversity, the priesthood ban on black members became increasingly problematic. Identity balance. Leaders carefully balanced preserving distinctiveness with integrating into broader American life. The Church's strength lay in its ability to adapt while maintaining a strong sense of identity. Closing reflection. The early and mid-20th century was an era of transformation for the LDS Church in America. From an isolated desert refuge, it expanded into a nationwide institution known for its discipline, family values, missionary zeal, and civic participation. It was no longer a sect on the margins of society but a growing faith woven into the American fabric. As you drift into rest, imagine the scene: missionaries on bicycles knocking on doors in small-town America, families gathering around radios to hear the tabernacle choir, and temples rising beyond Utah's borders. From persecution and exile, the saints had emerged into acceptance, carrying their faith into every corner of the United States. Part 16: Social Changes and Controversies. Introduction: A Church in a Changing World. The 20th century was a time of profound transformation for the United States and the world. Civil rights movements, women's liberation, new technologies, shifting cultures, and global wars reshaped society. For the LDS Church, these changes brought both opportunity and challenge. As the Church expanded into a global faith, it faced pressing questions about race, gender, social equality, and cultural adaptation. Some changes came slowly, others dramatically, but each left an indelible mark on the Church's history. Race and the priesthood ban. Historical context: since the mid-19th century, black men of African descent were barred from holding the priesthood. This restriction extended to temple ordinances as well, effectively limiting full participation. Growing criticism. As the Church expanded globally, particularly in Latin America and Africa, the ban became increasingly untenable. Civil rights movements in the U.S. further amplified the tension. 1978 Revelation. Under President Spencer W. Kimball, the Church announced a revelation lifting the restriction, declaring that all worthy male members could receive the priesthood. Aftermath. The decision was celebrated worldwide, opening the way for expansion in Africa and reshaping the Church's global image. The 1978 revelation was one of the most pivotal moments in Mormon history, aligning the Church with modern values of equality. Women in the LDS Church. Relief Society legacy. Mormon women had long played important roles in Relief Society, education, and literature. Limitations. Despite their activity, leadership remained male-dominated, with priesthood authority reserved exclusively for men. Feminist movements. In the 1960s-80s, some Mormon women pressed for greater roles, sparking debates about priesthood ordination, gender equality, and family roles. Church position. Leaders emphasized complementary roles. Men as priesthood holders, women as nurturers, while celebrating motherhood as sacred. Women's voices both supported and challenged the Church's official stance, creating an ongoing dialogue that continues today. The family and modern culture. Family proclamation. In 1995, Church leaders issued "The Family," a proclamation to the world, affirming traditional marriage between a man and a woman as central to God's plan. Opposition to same-sex marriage. The Church became active in political campaigns opposing same-sex marriage, particularly in California's Proposition 8, 2008. Generational tensions. Younger members often struggled to reconcile Church teachings with evolving cultural acceptance of LGBTQ rights. The Church's strong emphasis on family became both a unifying strength and a source of controversy in modern debates. Education and intellectual tensions. Universities. Brigham Young University grew into a major institution, producing scholarship while enforcing strict honor codes. Intellectual dissent. Scholars and intellectuals occasionally clashed with church leaders over historical research, feminism, or theology. Excommunications. The 1993, September 6, a group of intellectuals disciplined for critical writings, highlighted ongoing tensions between faith and scholarship. Balancing intellectual inquiry with religious authority remained a delicate matter. Media and public image in the 20th century. Positive branding. The Tabernacle Choir, humanitarian work, and missionary efforts helped foster a wholesome, family-oriented image. Persistent polygamy associations. Despite abandoning the practice in 1890, media portrayals continued to conflate Mormonism with polygamy. Popular culture, films, television, and literature alternately caricatured, romanticized, or misunderstood Mormon life. Managing public perception became a strategic priority for church leadership. Humanitarian efforts. Welfare system. Built during the Great Depression, the LDS welfare program expanded into one of the world's most effective religious aid systems. Disaster relief. The church gained praise for mobilizing quickly in natural disasters, sending food, supplies, and volunteers. Global outreach. As membership grew internationally, humanitarian programs expanded into Africa, Asia, and South America. These efforts reinforced the church's identity as not only spiritual but service-oriented. Ongoing controversies. Polygamist fundamentalists, splinter groups continued practicing polygamy, often portrayed in the media, causing confusion with the mainstream church. Historical transparency. As digital access expanded, issues such as Joseph Smith's polygamy and early church practices resurfaced, challenging official narratives. Faith and doubt. The Internet age created new avenues for questioning and new communities of former members, adding complexity to the church's modern identity. The church's history, once largely controlled, became subject to global scrutiny. Closing reflection. The LDS Church's journey through the 20th century was marked by adaptation and tension. It embraced modernization in education, humanitarian service, and global expansion, while grappling with the legacies of race, gender, and sexuality. Some revelations brought unity, others sparked controversy, but each reflected the challenge of balancing eternal principles with changing times. As you drift into rest, imagine the contrast: pioneers in covered wagons crossing deserts, now replaced by missionaries boarding planes bound for Africa, South America, or Asia. The faith that once huddled in exile had become a global church, yet still wrestled with the profound questions of equality, family, and truth in the modern world. Part 17, Mormonism in Popular Culture. Introduction. From persecuted sect to cultural curiosity. Over the course of 2 centuries, Mormonism has shifted from a small, persecuted frontier religion to one of the most widely recognized, and often caricatured, faiths in the world. Along the way, it has been celebrated for its discipline and music, mocked for its peculiarities, and mythologized in art, film, and literature. Popular culture became a stage where Mormon identity was contested, misrepresented, defended, and sometimes embraced. Early portrayals in 19th-century America. Hostile press. In the 19th century, newspapers and pamphlets portrayed Mormons as fanatics, polygamists, and threats to American values. Dime novels. Cheap fiction often cast Mormons as villains, shadowy patriarchs enslaving women in harems of polygamy. Political cartoons. Harper's Weekly and other publications regularly satirized Mormon leaders, presenting Brigham Young with dozens of wives at his side. These portrayals cemented stereotypes that persisted long after polygamy officially ended. Literature and the Mormon image. Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, in A Study in Scarlet, 1887, Mormon Utah served as the backdrop for mystery and intrigue, filled with sinister elders and forced marriages. Twain's satire. Mark Twain, in Roughing It, 1872, mocked the Book of Mormon as chloroform in print but offered wry humor rather than malice. Mormon authors. In response, Mormon writers began publishing their own defenses and faith-promoting literature, creating an alternative narrative. Literature became one of the first battlegrounds of cultural image. Music and the Tabernacle Choir. Early origins. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir, founded in the mid-19th century, became the church's most admired cultural export. National stage. By the early 20th century, the choir performed on national radio, later at presidential inaugurations and world fairs. Symbol of respectability, the choir countered negative stereotypes, presenting Mormons as disciplined, artistic, and patriotic. Through music, the church found a voice that resonated with broader America. Hollywood and film. Silent-era films, movies like A Victim of the Mormons, 1911, dramatized polygamy with sensational storylines of abduction and oppression. Mid-century portrayals, westerns and adventure films sometimes included Mormon pioneers as exotic background characters. Church productions. The LDS Church began making its own films, such as Man's Search for Happiness, 1964, used in missionary work. Recent representations. Hollywood has continued to use Mormonism as a backdrop, from critical films, September Dawn, to lighter references in comedies. Cinema reinforced both the fascination and distortion of Mormon identity. Theater and satire. Regional theater. Mormon pioneers celebrated their culture through plays and pageants, such as the Hill Cumorah pageant. Broadway satire. In 2011, the Book of Mormon musical debuted, lampooning missionary culture with irreverent humor. While offensive to some, it brought Mormon missionaries into mainstream consciousness in an oddly endearing way. Church's response. Rather than protesting, the LDS Church took out ads and playbills. You've seen the play, now read the book. Theater turned Mormonism into both spectacle and subject of ironic admiration. Television and popular media. Dramas, shows like Big Love, 2006 to 2011, explored polygamist families, often blurring the line between fundamentalist groups and mainstream LDS Church. Reality TV. Programs such as Sister Wives highlighted modern fundamentalist polygamy, reigniting old stereotypes. Documentaries. PBS and others produced serious documentaries examining Mormon faith, history, and controversies. Television reinforced the duality of Mormonism, wholesome mainstream faith versus sensational polygamist offshoots. Mormonism and politics in popular culture. Presidential candidates. The 2012 candidacy of Mitt Romney brought Mormonism into the spotlight, with media exploring LDS beliefs in depth. The Mormon moment. News outlets speculated whether Mormonism had finally entered mainstream acceptance. Satirical coverage. Late-night shows and satirical outlets often poked fun at Mormon peculiarities, while also noting the church's respectability. Politics ensured Mormonism was part of America's cultural conversation. Literature by Mormon authors. Orson Scott Card, the author of Ender's Game, openly identified as Mormon, though his political views often drew controversy. Brandon Sanderson, one of the most popular fantasy writers of the 21st century, Sanderson infuses Mormon themes subtly into his work. Expanding voices. Mormon authors, poets, and academics have brought Mormon perspectives into global literary culture. Art gave Mormonism new platforms to be understood beyond caricature. Global representations. Missionaries as icons. Across the world, Mormon missionaries in white shirts and ties became instantly recognizable figures, often portrayed with a mix of curiosity and humor. Media abroad. In places like Latin America and Africa, Mormonism has been represented less as exotic and more as aspirational, tied to family discipline and education. International art. Converts worldwide began creating their own cultural representations, diversifying the Mormon story. As the church grew internationally, portrayals broadened beyond American stereotypes. Closing reflection. From hostile caricatures in 19th-century newspapers to Broadway satire in the 21st century, Mormonism has been a recurring subject of fascination in popular culture. Sometimes revered, often mocked, always noticed, the faith has navigated its image with resilience. Music, literature, film, and media have all shaped how outsiders perceive the saints, while insiders continue to craft their own cultural expressions. As you drift into rest, imagine the ark, crude cartoons of Brigham Young with dozens of wives, transforming into the soaring harmonies of the Tabernacle Choir, dime novels of kidnapped women, giving way to Broadway satire, and missionaries on bicycles knocking doors, now immortalized in comedy skits. Mormonism, once despised, has become a fixture in the cultural imagination of the modern world. Part 18, Mormonism as a Global Religion. Introduction, From the Desert to the World. For much of its early history, Mormonism was a distinctly American faith, born in the religious ferment of New York, tested in the plains of Missouri, and established in the deserts of Utah. But by the late 20th century, the LDS Church began a remarkable transformation, from a regional, largely Western American movement into a global religion with members on every continent. This expansion reshaped the faith, creating both opportunities and challenges as the saints became truly international. The early seeds of global expansion. Missionary work abroad. As early as the 1830s, Mormon missionaries ventured overseas, with missions in England producing thousands of converts. European migration. In the 19th century, most European converts immigrated to Utah, strengthening the U.S. base rather than forming local congregations. Shift in strategy. In the 20th century, the Church encouraged converts to remain in their homelands, building indigenous congregations. This strategic shift laid the foundation for Mormonism's global footprint. Latin America and the Pacific. Mexico, missionary work began in the late 19th century, but flourished after the 20th century reforms. Mexican saints formed some of the largest congregations outside the U.S. Brazil, the 1978 revelation on priesthood allowed explosive growth, especially among Afro-Brazilian communities. Pacific Islands, Tonga, Samoa, and Fiji became strongholds of Mormonism, with high percentages of the population joining the faith. In Latin America and the Pacific, Mormonism became a vibrant cultural force. Africa and the 1978 revelation. Before the revelation, black Africans had expressed interest in the faith for decades but were barred from full participation. After 1978, with the priesthood extended to all, missions opened across Africa. Rapid growth. Countries such as Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa saw explosive membership increases. Local leadership. Indigenous leaders quickly rose to prominence, giving the African Church a distinct voice. Africa became one of the fastest-growing regions for Mormonism worldwide. Europe and Asia. Europe, growth was steady but slower, particularly in Catholic and secular nations. The faith remained a minority but persistent presence. Philippines, Mormonism flourished, with temples and congregations multiplying across the islands. Korea and Japan, post-war missions brought significant converts, creating strong East Asian congregations. China and India. Growth has been cautious, constrained by legal and cultural factors, but interest is present. In Asia, Mormonism adapted to cultures very different from its American roots. Global membership. Numbers. By the 21st century, more than half of the LDS Church's membership lived outside the United States. Temples worldwide. Temples rose across Europe, Latin America, Africa, and Asia, making sacred ordinances accessible globally. Translation of scriptures. The Book of Mormon was translated into dozens of languages, extending the reach of Mormon scripture. Mormonism was no longer simply American, it was multinational and multilingual. Challenges of global expansion. Cultural adaptation. Practices rooted in American culture sometimes clashed with local traditions. Economic disparities. In poorer regions, financial contributions required of members created challenges. Diversity. The Church had to balance unity of doctrine with sensitivity to diverse cultural norms. Expansion brought richness but also the complexity of being truly global. Global Mormon identity. Common faith. Despite cultural differences, members worldwide shared the same scriptures, ordinances, and leadership. Local expressions. In music, art, and daily life, local saints infused their faith with native traditions. Worldwide conferences. General Conference broadcasts linked Salt Lake City to members across the globe, creating a sense of global unity. The church became a worldwide community, united by belief but diverse in practice. Closing reflection. The transformation of Mormonism into a global religion is one of the most remarkable stories in modern faith. From a persecuted American sect, it grew into a worldwide church with millions of members, temples across continents, and voices from every nation. Yet the journey also brought challenges of adaptation, equality, and cultural diversity. As you drift into sleep, imagine a Mormon sacrament meeting not in Utah, but in Ghana, Brazil, or Samoa, hymns sung in local languages, children in traditional dress, prayers lifted in accents from around the world. The faith born in a small American town had become a global fellowship, carried by missionaries, embraced by converts, and reshaped by the voices of the nations. Part 19, Modern Polygamy and the Law. Introduction, The Shadow of the Principle. Though the LDS Church officially renounced plural marriage in 1890, and reinforced the ban in 1904, the legacy of polygamy never truly disappeared. Instead, it persisted in two ways, as a lingering stereotype attached to the mainstream church and as a lived reality for splinter groups and families who refused to abandon the principle. The 20th and 21st century saw ongoing debates in courts, legislatures, and the media about the legality of plural marriage. For America, polygamy remained a question of law, morality, and religious freedom. For Mormonism, it remained a question of memory, identity, and survival. The LDS Church and distance from polygamy. Second Manifesto, 1904. Under President Joseph F. Smith, the LDS Church reaffirmed its rejection of plural marriage, excommunicating members who entered new unions. Discipline. Leaders who secretly performed plural marriages were cut off, marking a decisive institutional break. Image management. Throughout the 20th century, the Church emphasized monogamy, family values, and patriotism, working to erase polygamy from its public identity. Yet no matter how firmly the Church rejected it, the association persisted in the public imagination. The rise of fundamentalist groups. Continuing the principle, those who believed the Manifesto was a capitulation formed their own communities in Utah, Arizona, Idaho, Canada, and Mexico. Short Creek, later Colorado City, Arizona, and Hilldale, Utah. This settlement became a hub of fundamentalist Mormonism, eventually birthing the FLDS, Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Other groups, the Apostolic United Brethren, AUB, the Kingston Group, and independent polygamist families also preserved the practice. These groups kept polygamy alive, insisting they were preserving the true faith. Legal crackdowns in the 20th century. The Short Creek Raid, 1953. Arizona authorities staged a massive raid on the polygamist community, arresting men and separating families. The raid backfired, generating sympathy for the families and painting the government as cruel. Inconsistent enforcement. After the raid, prosecutors often avoided pursuing polygamy unless tied to abuse, fraud, or underage marriage. The Warren Jeffs case, 2000's Jeffs, FLDS prophet, was prosecuted for arranging marriages involving minors, drawing global media attention. His case cast a harsh light on polygamist groups and reignited debates about religious freedom and exploitation. These crackdowns kept polygamy in the headlines long after the mainstream church had abandoned it. Media and public perception. Television and documentaries, programs like Big Love and Sister Wives explored modern polygamy, often blurring the lines between mainstream Mormonism and fundamentalist groups. Stereotypes. For many Americans, Mormon remained synonymous with polygamy, despite LDS leaders' repeated clarifications. Fundamentalist visibility. Media coverage both exposed abuses and humanized families who described polygamy as chosen and spiritual. The tension between sensationalism and reality shaped modern perceptions. The question of religious freedom. Legal status. In the U.S., polygamy remains illegal under federal and state law, classified as bigamy. Constitutional debates. Advocates argued that religious freedom should protect plural marriage, courts consistently ruled that civil law outweighed religious practice. Modern cases, some states soften penalties for consensual adult polygamy, treating it more like cohabitation than marriage fraud. The clash between faith and law continues, echoing 19th-century debates in a modern context. Mainstream LDS efforts to clarify identity. Persistent disassociation. The LDS Church has repeatedly emphasized it has no connection with fundamentalist groups. Public statements, leaders condemn polygamy as contrary to modern church teachings. Historic acknowledgement, recent transparency efforts, such as the Gospel Topics essays, have acknowledged Joseph Smith's polygamy, reframing it as part of history, not current practice. For the LDS Church, the task has been balancing honesty about its past with clarity about its present. Polygamy in global Mormon memory. International growth. As the Church spread globally, members in Africa, Asia, and Europe had little cultural association with polygamy. American perception. In the U.S., however, the shadow of polygamy remained long and heavy. Enduring symbol. For critics, polygamy represented Mormonism's strangeness. For fundamentalists, it represented Mormonism's purity. Polygamy, long abandoned, continues to define Mormonism's image in contradictory ways. Closing reflection. Though officially abandoned more than a century ago, polygamy remains one of the most enduring and complicated elements of Mormon identity. For mainstream saints, it is a past trial that tested faith and obedience. For fundamentalists, it is an eternal commandment that cannot be forsaken. For the American public, it is often the defining, and sensationalized, image of Mormonism. And for the law, it is a lingering question of where faith ends and civil authority begins. As you drift into rest, imagine the modern desert towns of southern Utah and northern Arizona, quiet streets, large families, whispers of a principle that once defined a people. In courtrooms, legislatures, and living rooms, the debate continues, echoing the struggles of Joseph, Brigham, and generations of saints who once lived and died by the same principle. Part 20, Mormonism in the 21st Century. Introduction, A Global Church in a Global Age. As the 21st century dawned, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints entered an era its founders could never have imagined. From a persecuted sect in the American frontier, it had grown into a worldwide faith with millions of members, temples spanning continents, and humanitarian projects reaching into every corner of the globe. Yet alongside growth came new challenges, navigating a digital age of transparency, addressing historical controversies, and defining its place in an increasingly secular world. Global membership and growth. Numbers. By 2000, membership had passed 10 million. By the 2020s, it exceeded 17 million. Temples worldwide. Temples now stand on nearly every continent, from Ghana to Guatemala, from Seoul to Sao Paulo. Missionary work. Tens of thousands of missionaries serve at any given time, their white shirts and ties now iconic symbols of the faith. Diversity. Growth outside the U.S. means most Latter-day Saints now live outside North America, shifting the Church's center of gravity. The Church that began in upstate New York became a global network of faith communities. Humanitarian and public image efforts. Humanitarian outreach. The LDS Church invests heavily in global relief, from disaster aid to clean water projects. COVID-19 pandemic. The Church contributed funds and resources worldwide, highlighting its role as a humanitarian organization as well as a religious one. Media strategy. Campaigns like I'm a Mormon 2010s sought to present members as ordinary, relatable, and diverse. Humanitarianism and branding became central to the Church's 21st century identity. Social issues and cultural tensions. LGBTQ+ rights. The Church's opposition to same-sex marriage, particularly in California's Proposition 8, 2008, sparked controversy. Later, leaders softened tone, emphasizing love and compassion while maintaining doctrinal opposition. Gender roles. Women continue to play vital roles, but debates about ordination and equality remain ongoing. The church expanded opportunities for women in councils and missions but maintained male-only priesthood. Racial legacy. The 1978 revelation ending the priesthood ban remains celebrated, but historical explanations of the ban continue to draw scrutiny. Navigating social change has been among the church's greatest modern challenges. Digital transparency and historical controversies. The Internet age, members and outsiders gained access to historical documents, leading to new awareness of early polygamy, translation issues, and controversies. Gospel Topics Essays. Beginning in 2013, the church published essays addressing difficult issues such as Joseph Smith's polygamy, the priesthood ban, and the translation of the Book of Mormon. Faith and doubt. Greater transparency helped some members reconcile history but led others to leave, sparking waves of faith crises. The digital age forced the church into a new era of openness, sometimes painful but necessary. Politics and public life. Mitt Romney's campaigns. Romney's 2008 and 2012 presidential bids put Mormonism under intense national scrutiny, dubbed the Mormon moment. Global influence. Church leaders increasingly meet with heads of state and international organizations, emphasizing religious freedom, family values, and humanitarian service. Neutrality policy. The church remains officially politically neutral but continues to advocate on moral issues. Mormonism has stepped onto the global political stage as a respected, if sometimes controversial, voice. The Temple and the Family. Temple expansion. Under Presidents Gordon B. Hinckley, Thomas S. Monson, and Russell M. Nelson, the number of temples has expanded dramatically. Doctrinal centrality. Eternal families and temple ordinances remain the core focus of Mormon theology. Family image. The church continues to present the family as the essential unit of God's plan, shaping its identity in an age of shifting cultural norms. Temples and families remain the visible and spiritual anchors of Mormonism worldwide. Fundamentalist polygamy in the 21st century. Public confusion. Fundamentalist groups practicing polygamy still cause outsiders to conflate them with the LDS Church. Media visibility. Shows like Sister Wives and scandals involving Warren Jeffs kept polygamy in the headlines. LDS clarification. The church emphasizes repeatedly that it no longer practices polygamy, working to distance itself from fundamentalist sects. The persistence of polygamist groups keeps alive an old tension between Mormon history and Mormon present. Mormonism's global challenges. Cultural diversity. The church must adapt to diverse societies while maintaining centralized leadership in Salt Lake City. Secularization. In the West, rising secularism challenges retention, while in the global South, growth remains strong. Identity balance. Leaders emphasize that the church is both uniquely restored Christianity and a global faith that embraces cultural diversity. The balance between universality and particularity is the church's great challenge in the new century. Closing reflection. In the 21st century, Mormonism stands as a global religion, respected for its discipline, humanitarianism, and family-centered teachings, yet still grappling with the legacies of polygamy, questions of equality, and the scrutiny of modern culture. From pioneer wagons to worldwide temples, from exile in the deserts to meetings with world leaders, the church's journey has been one of resilience, adaptation, and conviction. As you drift into rest, imagine the ark. The boy Joseph Smith in a grove of trees, Brigham Young declaring, "This is the right place," pioneers crossing the plains, polygamists hiding from federal marshals, missionaries boarding planes to Africa and Asia, and families gathering in temples from Sao Paulo to Accra. The story of Mormonism is not just the story of a faith, it is the story of survival, reinvention, and an enduring belief that God continues to guide His people in every age. I hope you all enjoyed this episode of Background Historian. Please subscribe to keep up to date with daily uploads. I'll see you tomorrow. Background Historian out.